They left their cities, their farms, their families. They went underground. Through ice and snow, in wind and rain, they fled from state and church-organized murder and manslaughter ordered by King Philip II. Thousands of Dutch religious refugees fled Flanders and Wallonia, Amsterdam and Brussels, the exact number is unknown, across the Green Border. They split up across England, the German territories, the Rhine, the Palatinate and East Frisia. The Spanish king's governor and his feared Council of Blood continued to rage mercilessly in the homeland. The extermination of those of other faiths was the goal of the governor, the Duke of Alba. The oppressed answered him with the Lord's Prayer of Ghent.
Our devil, who doth in Brussels dwell, cursed be the name in heaven and in hell. Grant that this devil may soon depart, and with him his council, false and bloody, who makes murder and rapine their daily study.
Here in Amsterdam too, the Protestants saw themselves as the church under the cross. The houses of worship remained closed to them. So they listened to the so-called hedge sermons of their reformed pastors in the open air, behind the old Libre in the heart of Amsterdam, which marked the city's limits in the 16th century.
Außerhalb der Grenze haben sich die Protestanten gesammelt.
Outside the border, the Protestants gathered to celebrate services in their own way.
Das war damals nicht gestattet.
That was not allowed at that time, but the one who preached was Johannes Arnoldi, the leader of this group. He's also one of the most famous refugees who went to Emden. And he agreed there with the Synod's decision that the Reformed oriented themselves towards Geneva and did not sign the Augsburg Confession.
Reformierten sich auf Genf orientierten und die Augsburger Konfession nicht unterschrieben haben.
So this Lutheran confession is not the main focus of the historical archives of the Free University of Amsterdam. Rather, the works of John Calvin and the first Dutch Bibles are found here, many of them printed in Emden and smuggled in by waterway.
16e eeuw een hele turbulente tijd. En juist ook voor dat Nederlands protestantisme, voor de beginfase eigenlijk van het Nederlands protestantisme, een hele bijzondere tijd waarin er in korte tijd ontzettend.
The 16th century was a very turbulent time, especially for the initial phase of Dutch Protestantism, because a lot of printed matter quickly came onto the market. Printing houses sprang up, translators appeared, the whole book production got going. A special aspect is, in the book production for Dutch Protestantism, the city of Emden played a very special role. These are all books that were printed in Emden. First of all, this Bible here, printed in Emden in 1556. I would have loved to show the title page, but unfortunately we only have this somewhat damaged copy. The title page has been lost due to frequent use. You just have to assume that this Bible was printed in Emden in 1556. A very important translation for the young Dutch Protestantism. Yes, and the Bible is regarded as the most important book for the faithful anyway.
The Catechism for Children is better preserved than the Old Bible, and it also comes from the printing press in Free Emden. The proof was printed on the title page in 1558. Whether books, refugees or participants in the Emden Synod, they took the route across the Zuiderzee, today's IJsselmeer.
Dus als we gaan bedenken hoe de vluchtelingen naar...
Well, if we look at how the refugees came to what is now East Frisia and other cities, then we see they escaped with the help of ferries. These were actually a kind of liner boats that regularly sailed from Amsterdam to other cities. The refugees took the route to Lemmer, which is on the west side of Frisia. It was a sea voyage of about 5 to 6 hours, bearing in mind that these weren't speedboats. If the wind was bad, it could take 12 hours or even longer. Most of the time, the ships left at night so that they could arrive in the morning. The ferrymen were obliged to take provisions for 6 to 8 passengers, cheese, peat for heating and beer on the way.
Kaarsen mee te nemen, turf om te stoken zodat het warm bleef en bier voor onderweg.
In the shadow of Emden's imposing town hall, the market has enjoyed great popularity since the Middle Ages. Here, German and Dutch farmers traded vegetables, flowers and cheese. Deals were struck. Synod participants from the Netherlands, the Palatinate and the Lower Rhine region used the annual autumn market together under its protection.
Emden war damals eine aufstrebende Handelsstadt.
Emden was an up-and-coming trading town at the time. The population had increased from 5,000 to about 20,000 due to the religious refugees from the neighbouring Netherlands. Here they lived with their families. And they had also helped make Emden a wealthy town. Here they preached in Dutch, here the Reformed faith prevailed, and it is fair to say that Emden was a city of printing, thanks to its status as a seaport, for it was here that books could be produced and of course distributed and brought to the people. Since the invention of printing, there has of course been a media revolution, which has also found its corresponding expression here in Emden. And the Johannes Alasko Library speaks for this. With its rich holdings, it is an eloquent contribution to this.
Ist ein beredeter Beitrag dazu.
Risen from the ruins, the Alasko Library is today not only a haven of reformed intellectual power, but also probably one of the most beautiful libraries in Europe. The library still exudes the calm and aura of a church, a worthy place to guard the literary treasures of mankind, including the letter of invitation to the Emden Synod.
Es ist am 30. Juni
It was sent on June the 30th, 1571 by Petrus Tatanus, Johannes Tafinus and Petrus Colonius to all refugee congregations in German territories, but also in the Netherlands to the churches under the cross, that is, the territories added to the present state of the Netherlands and Belgium, and also to England.
Zugeschlagen werden, wie auch nach England.
450 years ago, 29 representatives of Dutch communities met here in the district of Großwaldern. Today, a well-known tea shop attracts customers at this location.
Dies ist ja der Ort, wo früher die alte Stadthalle stand.
This is the place where the historic warehouse used to stand, built around 1570. This warehouse was used for cloth merchants at that time, and later also for ship and ammunition supplies. And even later the French Reformed congregation resided here in the hall. The place is actually quite historic here in Emden.
Der Ort ist tatsächlich ziemlich historisch hier in Emden.
Die Emder Synode von 1571 bildet den grundlegenden Baustein.
The Emden Synod of 1571 forms the fundamental cornerstone in the development of the ecclesiastical system of the Reformed Church. What is new about the Emden Synod is that it is composed of both pastors and lay people, who then make very important decisions for the church structure.
Ganz wichtige Entscheidungen treffen. Inhaltlich verbindet sich mit der Emder Synode.
In terms of content, the Emden Synod is linked to the Presbyterian synodal church system. That is to say, a tiered church system that begins with the congregation, ascends via the classes to the provincial synod. And as the last level, general synods are also envisaged, which hold the whole church together.
Sind dann auch Generalsynoden angedacht, die die ganze Kirche zusammenhalten.
No congregation should have priority or claim dominion over other congregations. No pastor over other pastors, no elder over other elders, no deacon over their deacons. They shall rather avoid the least suspicion and every opportunity for it.
Das legt die Grundlage.
This lays the foundation for the Reformed Church, as it will later emerge in the Netherlands, but also develops quite substantially in the Lower Rhine region.
Dann ganz wesentlich zur Entfaltung kommt.
Das sind also diese Protokolle der Synode in Emden.
So these are these minutes of the Synod in Emden from 1571. We have a copy of them.
Das ist also wirklich ein Schatz.
So this is really a treasure. What was negotiated was what just played a role in the Dutch Church.
Der Zusatz unter dem Kreuz.
With the addition of under the cross, because these people saw themselves persecuted by the Spanish. And the fact that East Frisia is included shows how large the catchment area of these people was who shaped this Emden Synod.
Die diese Emder Synode geprägt haben.
3 years earlier, this town had already given its name to a meeting of Dutch Protestants who wanted to prepare a common church order for their reformed congregations, the Wesel Convention.
Der Weser Konvent unterscheidet sich von den.
The Wesel Convention differs from the one in Emden in that it actually deals more with questions of how the congregations are structured, how they are organized.
Wie sind sie aufgebaut? Aber
But in Emden, the principle that one is above the other is clearly denied. And at the Wesel Convention, that can only be read between the lines.
Im Weseler Konvent allenfalls zwischen den Zeilen zu sehen.
Here in the Lower Rhine Museum, you can trace the medieval refugee flows which carried several thousand immigrants into Wesel, equating to about between 10 and 40% of the population.
Als der erste große Flüchtlingsschub dann ab 1567 kam.
When the first large influx of refugees came in 1567, a large part of the Wesel population was already reformed. They were welcomed with open arms and valued because they had a significant economic impact in Wesel, at least in part. It can be shown that these economic activities of the Dutch immigrants actually tripled the municipal income of Wesel, because the immigrants occupied economic sectors that didn't exist in Wesel before, with which good business could be done. For example, the manufacturing of silk fabrics and semi-silk fabrics, but also the know-how of the Dutch in the timber trade and, last but not least, the arms trade.
Und nicht zuletzt der Waffenhandel.
Huge ecclesiastical buildings and a Gothic town hall, built based on models from Flanders and Brabant, are still the landmarks of Wesel today. The Hanseatic city on the Lower Rhine region shows its prowess in the mid-16th century with the help of wealthy refugees. But Wesel was also a refuge for Dutch people who arrived penniless and had nothing.
Man hat also in dieser Zeit dann auch die Armenfürsorge versucht, besser aufzustellen.
During this time, attempts were made to improve and institutionalize the care of the poor. And the poor among the immigrants were cared for out of a sense of Christian charity.
Für mich ist eine ganz schöne Erfahrung gewesen.
And for me, it has been a very nice experience how refugee aid in Wesel has become active today and is still active and cares for the immigrants. But they definitely have this historical consciousness of Vesalia Hospitalis, the hospitable Wesel, and that they are aware of this tradition, that the reception of refugees in Wesel has a very long tradition.
Flüchtlingen in Wesel eben eine sehr lange Tradition besitzt.
An initiative to form the Emden Synod was launched in the Palatinate. The art historian Maria Lucia Weigel tells how the sovereign Frederick III, who was close to the Reformed Protestants, took in many refugees in Lamprecht, Schönau and here in Frankenthal.
Dieses kleine Bildchen zeigt Friedrich III.
This little picture shows Frederick III, Elector Palatine since 1559, who invited a group of about 60 families of Dutch religious refugees to live in Frankenthal, in the monastery of the Augustinian canons who had previously been driven out. The Emden Synod, which took place in 1571, was prepared by a conversation in Frankfurt the year before. This conversation was initiated and organized by Peter Datenus, who by then was court preacher to the Palatine Elector in Heidelberg, and who also wrote the invitation to the Emden Synod. But it wasn't just Heidelberg that was involved. Frankenthal sent his pastor Caspar Heidanus to Emden. There Heidanus took over the presidency of the Synod, that is, he presided over the Synod, and he also carried the results, the resolutions of the Emden Synod, back to the Palatinate.
Das heißt, stand dieser Synode vor und trug auch die Ergebnisse, die Beschlüsse der Emder Synode zurück in die Pfalz.
We're here in the ruins of the Eggenberg Abbey, which is the place where the religious refugees took up residence at the behest of the Elector Frederick III. They came here via Bobbenheim-Roxheim across the River Rhine and moved into the monastery buildings adjacent to this nave, or rather were located, because we're standing in ruins here.
Refugees from Wallonia, now a region in Belgium, found a new home in Schönau. Here, in Schönau's historical museum, only half an hour's drive from Frankenthal, a descendant of Walloon religious refugees watches over the heritage of her ancestors.
The Herians are known here as Walloon descendants. We have a lot of names here that are of Walloon origin. Le Grand, for example. All these names were translated into German at that time. They were dyers, they were cloth makers. That was the main job, so to speak.
In the former monastery building, Anne Herion shows what skills her ancestors had over the local inhabitants, namely the ability to apply the most beautiful art to the noblest fabrics, with so-called print models, stamps carved out of wood, which have been rediscovered centuries later.
That was a sensation. Old original printing models were found, with which cloths had been printed here with wonderful motifs. Tablecloths, trousseau pieces and linen were printed and so on. And today, Karin Langer is printing again with the old models in her beautiful Lilian shop. With copies of the models, of course, as we don't print with the originals because they are far too valuable. Most of them date back to the 16th century. That's why we print with copies. It's a great treasure, and we've reactivated it all because it's just so important to carry on. Where do these things come from? What is this craft that the Walloons brought with them? Yes, cloth making. It flourished here.
Und die Tuchmacherei, die hat hier ihre Blüte erlebt.
Escape to freedom. The empires of the scoundrels and abusers of old have long fallen, while the disintegration of the scattered Dutch congregations was prevented. They networked and found new strength, anti-hierarchical, synodal, a classless church, so to speak. These social networks have had an impact beyond the Reformed Protestants to other churches and across society, and they exist today, still going strong after 450 years.
The principle that no one should be above the other, that is actually a democratic approach, which then continued to have an impact and has also shaped our democratic understanding and constitutions. That is the significance of the Emden Synod today in the extra-church sphere and of course also in the church sphere. If we think of the Mayflower's voyage to America, for example, they took these thoughts over with them, which are also reflected in the US Constitution. In my own voluntary work, I've always been taught that in the Reformed Church, bottom is top. All power comes from the congregation. This is a great transfer to our democracy and society today. I live very much for the issue of citizen participation, listening to the suggestions of our citizens. And that's how our democratic structure is built. And that's also how the Emden Synod influences our understanding of democracy today. That is something very special for me as a Democrat.
Die Idee, dass es keine Hierarchie gäbe.
The idea that there is no hierarchy, that the elders, the deacons and pastors were on the same level. That was really fundamental and formative for the church here in the Netherlands.
Die Kirche hier in der Niederlande.
Synod means that leadership in the church is not done by individuals, but by many different people coming together. That's what matters to me and is my daily experience. We Reformed don't have a bishop, but we have bodies that perform the episcopal task, namely, looking out, looking in and communicating. There are many who lead the church.
Viele sind die Kirche leiten.